Hey, hello everyone. Thank you so much to everyone that signed up to receive this interview. So I am here with Juno. As you may know, she's the author of A Necessary Kindness, which is a book all about abortion care in the UK. Juno, did you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Millie. So, my name's Juno. As you said, I'm the author of A Necessary Kindness, which came out in hardback this year, and paperback will be following next year. And it's a little bit to give a bit of a background. It's about my work. So I've been working in abortion care. I'm a trained as a midwife in the NHS, and I have been working in abortion care for sort of almost a decade now. And it's just it's kind of a window into the clinic, into the life of someone working in abortion care, through my eyes, and also telling the stories of some of the women that I've encountered over the years. um, and I talk a little bit throughout the book about my sort of personal life, and how that sort of relates to things that I'm going through and experiencing with my patients as well.
Lovely. Yeah, that was such a brilliant introduction. I feel like that really beautifully summarized the book. So I read your book recently a couple of months ago, and I've just read it again in preparation for this interview. And it reminded me like how well written it is. And I feel like it's a very nice hybrid between informing people, but also, a
Mm.
nice memoir type style. I don't know whether that was what you were trying to portray throughout the book, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's definitely a personal
absolutely.
story as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely a kind of balance, trying to strike the balance between, I wanted it to be, the purpose of it was not really my sort of autobiography. Initially, the purpose was to inform and educate, and offer this insight that people don't have,
Mm.
into, behind the doors of an abortion clinic. But I wanted it to be, for myself to be vulnerable, because it's all about being vulnerable. The patients are vulnerable with me, and
Mhm.
open, and I get this sort of insight into their lives. And I felt like I owed it to these patients, talking about their stories, and to be vulnerable as well myself, and to kind of be open, um, and give that, sort of personable,
Mhm.
personal approach to the what's often a kind of politicized, um,
Mhm.
debate, about abortion care. So I kind of wanted to bring it back to the human element of it, as well. So
Yeah.
that's kind of why I put stuff about me and my children and my story.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was, yeah, a really nice way to have done it because, like you said, it's so politicized and we forget that there's actually real people behind this issue and
Mm.
that there's real stories and real reasons why people,
Yes.
seek abortion care. Where did your inspiration come to write the book?
So it came, actually in the days where the Roe versus Wade, in the US, where there was that initial leak that they may be thinking of overturning the, sort of constitutional right for women in the US
Mhm.
to have an abortion. And that information was leaked, a few years back, and they were talking about it actually on a radio program. And I had never before sort of phoned into any sort of radio station. And there was someone on the, they were talking about it, and someone phoned in, a guy phoned in, and started talking about, I know this happens in abortion clinics, and this is awful, and this is how the
Oh.
people are treated, and all this. And I thought, gosh, this is really dangerous misinformation, because I
Mm.
guess he's heard it from someone, that maybe someone had a bad experience, or whatever, and he's spouting it as if this is fact and this is what happens. And I thought, this is
Mm.
really damaging to spread this information. So I phoned in, pulled over in the car, phoned in, and said, I work in abortion care. You have to put me on air. And I got put on, and I'm not, I'm very conflict averse. And they just
Mm.
said, we're going to put you on with him. And I was terrified, but I just thought, I have to do this. I have to dispel this kind of misinformation. And so we had
Absolutely.
this brief debate, only about 5 minutes, where I said, I've worked in abortion clinics for however many years it was at that time, and actually that's not not the case at all, and this is the policy, and one bad experience cannot be presented then as fact for what happens to everyone. And so I kind of dispelled that, and then that same day, actually, I was having coffee with someone who is a book editor, just by chance. And I said, God, I just had this experience on the way to meeting you. And she suggested to me, maybe there's something in that. Maybe there is something in writing down some stories and dispelling these myths and this misinformation, and coming from the point of view of someone who is in the know. And so it kind of was born from there, really. And I wrote down a couple of stories. We turned it into chapters, sent it out, and it sort of went from there. And a lot of the sort of the big publishers, interestingly, kind of picked it up and fed back that it was, great topic, great story, great idea, but no, thank you, we don't want to put our names to it. A lot of the big names initially said no, and we found a couple of independent publishers and a couple of publishers we sort of had a chat to, and we chose one who was absolutely really wanted to take it on, really keen, really saw the value in it, and it sort of went from there.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I mean, that I so wasn't expecting you to say that, that was how it started, but I can definitely understand that, just hearing it, because there's so much negative discourse around abortion and abortion care. And, like you said multiple times in the book as well, is just there's this image of who seeks abortion care. And I think your book pretty much straight away completely dispels that. And it just goes, no, this is not who, seeks abortion care. This is not who we see in the clinics all the time. I think that's really important. So no, I absolutely understand why that was your motivation for doing that. So you mentioned obviously seeing multiple different publishers and things like that. Had you had any thoughts previously of like maybe wanting to write a book, or was that ever anything that you were thinking of until this moment?
No, I don't think so. I don't know that previously I didn't see my skill set in, of my siblings, for example. I was never the one that's good with words. I'm the caring one. I'm the one that's, I love people and working with people, and I wasn't necessarily the kind of academic one, as it were, and I never saw that as my sort of skill set or something that I was very strong at. So I don't think I had ever thought about seeing myself as writing a book or as an author. And even actually when we had this discussion about, putting it into a book, I did think, I don't know that I've got enough to say. I don't know that I've got enough stories. I don't know that, how would that read? Is it really interesting to people? And I kind of didn't really have faith in my own skill, I guess, in just kind of telling these stories. Obviously I'm fascinated by the stories, but I'm in it and I work in it, and I see these people, I speak to these people face to face all the time, and I guess there was just an initial sort of, will I be able to pull this off? Will I do it justice? And that's when we kind of brought in a sort of co-writer, a ghostwriter, who we sort of did it together, and she was often the one that really helped to form the stories into something that read really well, and really, I have these stories, but how do I get it out there? How do I how do I make it engaging and not just me kind of rambling and as if I'm chatting and telling these stories, which I could do for hours and hours, but so together we kind of hopefully pulled it off, and I'm really proud of eventually what we managed to sort of achieve between us.
Yeah, as you should be. I mean, this is one of the best books I've ever read. I think it's just brilliant, as I've said multiple times. But so what was that process like? Because I haven't actually spoken to any authors that have had a co-writer, and I just wanted to see what that process was like having that.
So it was great. It was, having sort of, I came in with we sort of sat and chatted for hours and hours and hours. And it was a lot of just trying to, we had an idea of, these are the chapters, these are the types of things we want to say. I would go away and she would almost interview me, like, prod me, think of that, think of this, think of that, tell me this story. And I would sort of say it as if, because I can talk about stories, and I would sort of give these stories, give this information, and then together we'd kind of go back and forth drafting. We'd get it on paper. I would add, actually, make sure it was correct, and add the detail, and she'd kind of make sure that grammatically it made sense and it flowed and it was interesting and not just sort of a ramble. And it just went a lot of back and forth, a lot of hours, working on chapters. I did a lot of the I did a lot of the storytelling, the kind of facts about the cases, and the abortion sort of side of things. A lot of the stats and stuff she was excellent at finding, and getting, all the kind of more gathering the evidence and stuff that I talk about in the stats and things. So we kind of had our strengths and we pulled it together, and it really worked well, actually, and we kind of kept each other motivated. We knew which bits we could work on and where our strengths were, and kind of kept pushing each other to, you find this out, I need to think about this, and that kind of, when one of us is having kind of brain freeze, that writer's block, you've got the other one to say, right, this is where we need to focus, this is re-jog your memory, and that sort of thing.
It definitely sounds like you've got some complementary skills there. I think that's so interesting, because I'm sort of similar to you. I definitely am more of like a storyteller. I can ramble, but I wouldn't be able to put it down in a way that's maybe easily consumable for people.
Exactly.
So that's nice to know that you have that ability to sort of have someone put it all into actual words that people are able to read.
Yeah, exactly. Like a cohesive story, rather than just sort of me chatting away and recording myself. But
because obviously there's space for that, and obviously the book is majority you sort of telling your stories, because that's what the purpose of the book was. But I think to have that written down in a really easily consumable way was lovely. So we do have a question from a follower similar to that. It's just like, how did you keep how did you find your motivation and keep going when you hit a wall, like you said about writer's block? Was there ever any times with that?
Well, so I mean, so I was actually pregnant for some of the process of writing, so writer's block was definitely just a general brain fog was definitely a thing. And I think, I mean, I had essentially a deadline, in the fact that I wanted to get this book out and the bulk of it done by the time my baby was born. So that was a kind of very big motivating factor. But I think, when there were episodes of sort of, it was very sort of all consuming, emotionally as well. I'm sort of reliving a lot of these stories, and I'm having to use my brain, and some of the stories are quite traumatic, and I've kind of got to really dig into the women's stories, but also my own story. And I talk in there about my my divorce and becoming a single mom and things like that, and sort of having to dig deep was exhausting at times. And I think just allowing myself to have that space to just pause, let's just take a minute, let's gather, I need to just have a break, even for a few days, and just say, look, we're going to pick this up again in a few days, or let's work on a different topic, let's talk about different stories, and then come back to it. And I think so there was a lot of jumping about, and coming back to things, and that's why it was helpful to have someone who's sort of great at the writing aspect as well, because I could jump about, and she would sort of take everything we're talking about and put it into a sort of a chronology, and kind of made that make sense. But I think as well, a motivation for me was the timing, not only obviously having my baby, but it was really topical, and it is topical. It always comes up every election. It kind of rears its head as a sort of people show how left and right they are, and with their policies about it. But I think since Roe versus Wade, and then there was lots of chat in the UK about it, I really wanted
Yeah.
it to be timely. And I
Mm.
didn't want to sit on this information for years and years and let it drag on. I wanted to kind of harness that energy and that interest and
Yeah.
get it out, so that we, that there this sort of spread of misinformation that comes a lot of the time when there are elections here and globally. I
Mm.
wanted it to be out there in time for a lot of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think just remembering the motivation and also just allowing myself the space when there was that block or that moment of, I need to take a breath, just stop and come back to it.
Yeah, I mean, especially because it's your day job as well. Like it would sort of consume you quite a lot, I would imagine. And
Exactly. Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
very difficult thing, in some respects to speak about, especially because you are revealing difficult, like you said, about your divorce and things like that, becoming
Mm,
a single mom, that they're quite difficult parts in your life, I would imagine, especially to have to
yeah.
relive, I suppose, whilst you're
Yes.
writing. And I
Mm,
remember in the book you mention about how, I think it's right at the beginning, like maybe in the introductory chapter, but where you say that when Roe v. Wade was actually overturned in the US, that women started to be prosecuted in the UK under the Offences Against the Person Act.
yeah.
And there seems to be quite a good correlation there. Um,
Mm.
Sorry, not a good correlation, but quite a big correlation there.
Strong correlation. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, I
yeah,
understand.
yeah, not a good one at all. But yeah, quite a clear correlation there between those two things happening. So no, I understand your motivations there. I think that's, yeah, I mean, deadlines and that is definitely a good motivator.
Mm.
So did you know what you wanted the structure to look like, or did you know what you wanted the book to look like? Because it's obviously quite a unique um like cover and everything, like actually looking at it.
Yes.
So I wondered if you like, what was the process behind like choosing that?
So in terms of kind of the structure of the book, I think I did have quite a clear idea of how I wanted it to be, and that's what we kind of proposed to, the publishers, was this kind of, essentially I wanted to cover, in each chapter I kind of touch on a different, I guess, group of society or group of women,
Mm.
that seek abortion care, because I wanted to show throughout the whole book, all these chapters, the variety of people that you see. And so each chapter we've sort of loosely, I kept it as a topic of, different people, different aspects of abortion care, I guess. And then in each of them I give a lot of the background, in terms of sort of, the stats and, more of the sort of factual information, and then I give real life examples of women in those sort of, either situations in their life, or aid groups, or all these different sort of,
Mm.
aspects of society, that I see, and try to illustrate, I guess, through
Yeah.
these real life stories. So that structure we kind of maintained, and throughout each of the chapters I then sort of touch on, my life throughout, and kind of the chronology of, what's happening at each
Yeah.
stage of my life throughout the book, and when I sort of, encounter these women. So that the structure, did end up quite being, very, true to what we had proposed, and I think the publisher was, they liked the structure, they liked the idea, to show that variety. So that in itself was quite, easy. And the cover did, so that wasn't a lot. I mean, it was in terms of my approval, but
Mm.
that came a lot from the publisher, and they spent a lot of time. We came up with a lot of different ideas, because obviously we don't want it to be graphic, even though there are sort of moments in the book
Yeah.
that are quite graphic. We don't want it to be, we didn't want it to appear sort of graphic on the offset, or scary or off-putting. We wanted it to be, welcoming, and,
Mm.
human and kind and compassion, and trying to get that into an image is not very easy.
Yeah.
Obviously we wanted to kind of, try and show what it was about. We didn't want the kind of, I guess, cliche sort of, picture of a patient, or hand holding. We wanted it more,
Mm.
um a bit more illustrative, I think, and choosing the colors was a bit tricky as well, because we didn't want
Oh,
red, because we didn't want to sort of
oh yeah.
imply blood. It was a lot went into it.
Mm.
But I think I was happy with the result, and it just comes across, I think, to me as gentle. There's the image appears gentle, but also there are, I made sure that I got them to put in some bold colors, because the stories are bold, and the story, what I'm trying to achieve is bold. So initially it was sort of, I didn't want it too pastely and gentle, because it is a hard-hitting book as well. So
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
not easy to get something like that into an illustration, but I do think they did it justice in the end.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely brilliant. I think I remember when I first saw it, it was on Instagram, and I remember seeing, I think it was maybe an agency advertising it on their story, because it was like your publication day. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember thinking, like, before I'd even read the title, thinking this is a beautiful book. Like, I
Yeah,
absolutely love it. And yeah, it's a very natural kind of cover, because I think, yeah, I definitely think it demonstrates the topic in a really nice way, which I didn't really think about too much before. But yeah, regarding your structure, I think it's really nice how you grouped it all together, and you do reference other parts of the book throughout. But yeah, I think the chapters are very well selected, and it's nice that you also follow your story through the book as things are happening.
yeah.
I think that was a really nice, decision from you. So we have another follow-up question. So what age did you become a lover of books, if you are at all?
So I actually am not a massive reader myself, ironically. And as I said, of the siblings, my sibling was always the reader.
Yeah.
I like a factual book, and actually my daughter has ended up following the same. We love kind of reading non-fiction, and I love reading books about people, and
Mhm.
about different people's lives and things. So that's always what I've enjoyed. Um, Reading about people, and like Call the Midwife, for example, years ago when that first came out, that really gripped my attention, and those sorts of books are what I enjoyed. But I think it has to grab my attention. I as a child, I sort of would read fiction, and I started to realize that actually those sorts of fiction, for me, it doesn't grab my attention in the same way that reading about real people and lives and um, different aspects of people's lives, that's what interests me. That's what would kind of keep my attention.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what I would say, that I'm much more of a non-fiction um, reader,
Yeah.
if at all. But I don't wouldn't say I'm a massive reader generally, unless it's something I'm really interested in. I want to invest my time in learning about someone, or learning about an aspect of human life that I don't know, and I think that's what I was, I guess, trying to get across in this, was where my interest is kind of showing people an aspect of human life, or human experience that they might not be aware of.
Mhm.
I do think other people share that kind of thirst for knowledge, I guess, or that love for learning
Mhm.
about other people's experiences that are different, similar to their own in some ways, but also, experiences that are completely far from their own lives.
Yeah.
And that sort of fascination, I guess, with the lived experience of someone that is completely the opposite to something they've ever experienced. So, that ended up sort of, coming
Mhm.
through, and in part of the reason I wanted to write the book, and why it was how it came about, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's very interesting. I think people will be interested to find out that actually you're not too much of a reader yourself. But I mean,
Mm,
I am a non-fiction person. Obviously, the book club is non-fiction. So I am the exact same, and I love just learning about the world as well. Like, I like
yes.
learning about the real world and what's going on here, what I can know about people,
Yes.
like you said, exactly about people's experiences and things that I may not have gone through or may have gone through, and it's nice to have something to relate to, for example. Yeah, I think it's brilliant that your book allows that for people? Because I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but is it 1 in 4 women that have an abortion in their lifetime, or
Lifetime.
1 in
Yeah.
3? Yeah. Um, I think, yeah, so that's very comforting for women to have your book available, because it's, you know, a real life experience.
Yeah.
Although there is obviously merit in reading fiction, yeah, it's not particularly my thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, going into the book a little bit more, just to reference a couple of moments in the book. So, you mentioned in the first chapter that, there was an environment in the midwifery setting that you were in prior to moving over to the abortion care, that you sort of weren't able to carry a patient through their entire pregnancy. So you needed to sort of build that trust and rapport with the customer, sorry, with the patient quite quickly.
Mm.
Has this environment sort of helped you when you moved over into abortion care? Because it may be sort of similar in the way that you
Similar. Yeah,
treat your patients.
absolutely. I think, it's really a skill of any, a lot of medical professions, in fact, where you essentially you may meet someone and within minutes you have to have their whole trust. They are
Mhm.
they're divulging to you information that they might have not told anybody. They're often, in a medical setting, they might be putting their life, or at least they feel like they're putting their life in your hands, and you need to, earn that trust very quickly.
Mhm.
And absolutely in midwifery that comes across. I mean, when I was training, you do get the luxury, you can sort of pick up patients and sort of follow them throughout their pregnancy. It's called case loading, and
Mm.
some teams do it, some hospitals do it, and it's excellent. And you build rapport, and you spend months kind of learning about people and gaining their trust, and it's really lovely when it's able to happen. But as with the state of the NHS, I think things
Mm.
have changed and we've had to adapt. And often you are going into a room where you've never met these people before. Their life is in your hands, and you need to make them feel comfortable instantly. And that was my
Yeah.
experience as well, having my own children. You're very vulnerable, even as a midwife myself. When I became the patient, I still felt very
Mm.
vulnerable and scared, and I really needed to someone to walk in and hold my hand, and I just needed to feel like I trusted them straight away. And that's
Yeah.
the same with abortion care, even more so, because you're not going to have long with these people. You might, when I'm speaking to people on the phone, you get on the phone, you introduce yourself, and then you're asking them essentially to divulge a
Mhm.
lot of their personal information, possibly secrets that they haven't told anybody. And you need to make them feel like they can trust you, and that you are not going to judge them, and that you care and you are there to help them. And so I think that's absolutely one of the key skills in, well, in my experience in midwifery and in abortion care, but probably in a lot of settings where it's about people and people's lives, caring settings, healthcare settings. um but I think in the case of abortion care, it's often for the people that I speak to, they may have told one or two people, and it's really a shame, because
Mm.
you I want people to feel like, one day would be my dream, to feel like they
Mhm.
can talk about these things, with all their friends, without fear of judgment. But often they're coming in, and they may have told one person, one friend,
Yeah.
or their partner, or a parent. But other than that, I'm maybe the only other person that they've told. And so I need
Mm.
to, you know kind of build that with them very quickly, and make them feel comfortable, because they have to be honest, and being honest will keep them safe.
Yeah.
So it's my job and my responsibility to make sure that I kind of create an environment where they feel so safe to be honest with me and open, so that I can in turn make this process as safe and as easy for them as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the stories you tell, it sounds like you definitely were that person for them. You mentioned in the book as well, where, if it was a particularly vulnerable patient, or if it was someone that needed a little bit of extra care, that they would name it for Juno. They would want it to be put onto you because you were very caring,
Mm,
which was really nice to hear, because obviously you do sometimes worry, and you've mentioned in the book as well, and I've read elsewhere, that there are difficulties with women in the healthcare system, especially with, not being believed or not.
yes.
You mentioned about abortion care and things like that, and how other aspect or other sort of sectors of healthcare really sort of look down on it,
Mm-hmm.
in a way, which is just awful to hear about, because it's a medical um procedure that people are
Yeah.
going through. Why isn't it treated like that, like any
Mm.
other? So, yeah, I think it's very interesting hearing your story about being a patient as well, and I can imagine that sort of adds to your uh, knowledge or your understanding as well of how patients should be treated. Being a patient yourself.
Mm.
With regards, obviously, you did mention in the beginning that you did suffer with anorexia when you were around like 16, I think it was. And I
Yeah.
thought it was insightful that you mentioned that you wanted to be you mentioned you wanted to be the perfect skinny, and then this then manifested itself into wanting to be the perfect patient once you sought
Yeah.
treatment. And I wondered whether this, you found this pattern at all whilst you've been working in the clinic or even in midwifery.
I think, I mean, I think that is my nature. I've always been sort of, a perfectionist, and I think what I've learned, in adulthood and now having my children, I'm very careful to recognize that in myself and make sure that I turn it into a positive, and don't let it consume me, don't let it become a negative. Obviously with the anorexia, it went too far. It impacted me negatively. It starts off pushing you, and I got excellent grades and this, and I was
Mm,
top of this at school, and all of these things, and there
amazing.
are aspects that it really helped me achieve, and do my best, but then it then spilled over into a really negative, um it impacted me really negatively, for a few years, and I think I had to kind of reset, and actually kind of not long after my recovery I then started midwifery, and looking back, I guess I was quite young when I started my training, um,
Mm,
and there were aspects of the training that I wanted to get through my training perfectly. I wanted to have the perfect essay and perfect training, and
mm,
perfect feedback from all of my mentors, and so it is hard when that doesn't necessarily happen, because that's not life. You'll have experiences, you'll work with people that you don't necessarily gel with, or when you're training and things like that. So I think I do try. Even now, I'm very aware of this aspect of myself, and I
mm,
really try to use it, um, and give myself kind of the grace that not everything has to be perfect, and I absolutely do my best, and I think where that sometimes, and I think I mentioned this in the book, where I find it sometimes comes into play is if someone divulges something to me, and for example, abuse, or something that's going on, or a pregnancy as a result of rape, for example,
mm,
I'm there, and I can provide care for this aspect of their recovery, this aspect of the crisis that they're in, and I can provide the abortion, I can make sure it's safe, I can be that
mm.
person. But what I can't do is help them to resolve all of their issues, create
Yeah.
this, be the perfect, I guess you want to be their midwife, but also their friend and their parent,
Hmm.
and their, you know I have to kind of, I've had to, over the years, and over speaking to many women in similar sort of, I guess, traumatic situations, and even those that aren't, you want to be able to provide all the care. I want to resolve
Yeah.
your life completely, and you leave here, and you've had this perfect experience, and you
Hmm.
go away from here with no issues, and you're so much happier, and I think that's not possible, and I need to know where my skills are and my profession, what I am there to do, and
Hmm.
I can't do everything. I can't be the police. I can't be the judge and resolve everything.
No, I think, and you say during your book as well about wanting to help people in so many aspects when you just can't, you can't be
Yes.
that person for everyone. And I imagine it's quite difficult to have that knowledge, but then at the same time, you are still helping them.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's some form of comfort.
Yeah.
So in regards to that, how do you, I mean, I did write down, how did you support your own mental health whilst writing this book? But, as well, that maybe during your work as well, is there anything that you do to support yourself?
I think, yeah, I think the team at work, all of us, it's a very specific job. The people in it
Mhm.
are there because they love supporting people, and they love to help. And I think, drawing on that strength and that support, because there are moments where if you've dealt with a patient who, you do end up sort of taking on some of that trauma, even in the short term, and
Mhm.
being able to say, to your colleague, go and have a cup of tea, I'll take this next patient, or whatever it is. I've had so many experiences of great support from colleagues, from managers, in personal life as well. When I had a miscarriage, which I mentioned in the book, and
Mm.
my manager being there and really helping me. And you do go through a lot of life when you're working full time in an environment with other people.
Mm.
You're very open. They sort of experience your life with you and all the ups and the downs. And having that team of people. I worked with men and women, all different ages, and we do form a very tight team, because often it's something that you might not be able to talk to with family and friends. I
Mm.
didn't have that experience. I had lovely supportive family, and my wife initially, and now my wife now. I've always been very lucky
Mm.
with the support I've had for what I do. And they have just wanted me to do something that makes me happy, and they've been proud that I do something that helps people and helps the world. And so I've always been able to come home and debrief if I've needed to. And I think that has been a real real savior a lot of times when I need to just get things off my chest so that I can be strong enough for the next patient that needs me.
Yeah.
So I have been very lucky in that regard.
That's brilliant. And I can imagine sort of working with vulnerable customers. Sorry, I keep calling them customers. It's just because I work in customer service. Sorry, patients. Working with vulnerable patients, I can imagine it's hard to see, other people that don't have that support system as well. Um, like
Yeah,
during, them going through tough times. Just
absolutely.
in relation, because you did mention about your wife, I do have a follow-up question, which is actually from my girlfriend. And she wondered whether your sexuality influenced your outlook on abortion in any way.
Well, I think I mean, that is a good question. Has it influenced it? I mean, it's difficult to know, I guess, what sort of unconscious influences,
Mm-hmm.
impact the choices that you make, really. I think um, what it has shown me in a way, I guess what I do draw parallels with is the kind of real need for humans to feel not judged,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of the importance of being accepted for decisions that you make, or for decisions that are out of your control,
Mm-hmm.
um, and 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 just being able to be open about aspects of your life. And I think, again, my family and my in-laws are so supportive,
Mm-hmm.
and I see, amongst, obviously, in within my patients, but also amongst you know friends and other and colleagues who are in the LGBTQ plus sort of community, who
Mm-hmm.
don't have that same freedom to express themselves, um, to be open and honest with, be it colleagues or family. And I think, I've always wanted to create an environment where people can just be open about all aspects of their life, and I
Yeah.
guess that partly comes into it, that, and the fact that I'm obviously quite liberal and I just truly believe in people living the lives and making the choices that are right for them,
Yeah.
regardless of what other people think, and I try and instill that in my children, that
Mm.
real true non-judgmental approach to people, not just saying it but really living it and acting it, and
Mm.
showing that you're an ally for everyone, all different
Yeah.
types of people, whether it's your own experience, whether you are heterosexual or whether you haven't had an abortion, doesn't matter your experience as long as you're open and allow other people to have those experiences. So I guess yes, there are parallels,
Mm.
which is an interesting to think about, because I don't think that I would have thought that my sexuality necessarily had an impact, but I guess it does, because it's how I live my life, and it's how I
Yeah.
approach people, and people going through different experiences as well.
Yeah, sorry, that was just very beautiful. That was
Oh,
a
thank
really
you.
lovely explanation. I mean, your book made me cry multiple times, both times I read it, so it's very understandable now why. But yeah, no, I think that's a very lovely way to have an outlook on it. And it can be hard sometimes to realize that you do, you know, the way you live your life is the way you see the world. And
Mm-hmm.
it can influence, and sometimes even if you don't, like you mentioned in the beginning of when you answered that, it's just sometimes it is unconscious the way that you view it. But
Yes.
that's really lovely that it's sort of just you just want people to live how they want to live,
Mm.
which is a good correlation between that. And sort of going into the next question as well, is who was your target audience when you were writing the book? Did you have anyone in mind, or was it sort of just everyone?
So it's a funny question, I guess, because this actually
Mm.
came up with, obviously, when we were sort of going out to publishers, and we had some feedback, again, often from sort of the bigger publishers, saying, we're concerned that this is too much of a narrow target audience. And by that, I
Mm.
believe they meant only, women of, this generation, maybe,
Mhm.
a certain generation, liberal women would be interested in reading. And I thought that is that misunderstanding is
Mhm.
exactly why I'm doing this book.
Yeah.
I don't think there is a target audience as such, because obviously women are going to be drawn to experiences that maybe they have had themselves. Anyone is, they
Mm.
might. And what I wanted was for people, young people, to young as in kind of teens, I guess, when it becomes sort of an
Mm.
appropriate read, because there are some details in there, but I guess sort of from late teens, pre-children, it's, I want them to read it and see this as information about
Mhm.
the what happens, and kind of people that necessarily haven't had those experiences, but also people that are either going through it now or recently have had those experiences, to know that these things are normal. This is it's okay to
Mm.
have these experiences. And also, I kind of wanted to broaden it to people who either had terminations historically, or many generations above, like my grandma who read the book,
Mhm.
and to kind of dispel some maybe information that was going around when they were having children, and when their friends were probably having terminations
Mm.
30 years ago, and to give that kind of, I wanted to give that acceptance of however you've been feeling, maybe you've been feeling a certain way or had a certain view about abortion or your own experience for all these years, and actually it's okay, and to hopefully um, maybe provide some relief for people, but also really important for, I guess, the sort of allyship kind of
Mm.
mentality comes into it, when it's for men, it's for people who maybe past sort of reproductive age, who may never now experience an abortion
Mm.
themselves, but to provide, what can they do to provide support to change the to sort of change the discussion and
Hmm.
create an environment and a society where people can talk about their experiences. So, for me, I think it was one of those when I got that feedback about a narrow target audience, and I thought, that's so not how I
Mm.
see this.
Yeah.
I didn't see it as a narrow target audience at all. I really saw it as, this is a book that everybody can benefit from, because
Yeah.
everybody collectively creates a sort of society and the sort of world where that can change people's experience of
Mm.
abortion. So yeah, that would be short of saying everybody. I
Yeah.
knew that certain groups of people would not want to read the book, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It wasn't a book to try and change people's minds, or I wasn't trying to be antagonistic or sort of particularly political.
Hmm.
So people are welcome to not read the book. It's not going to be for everyone, but I really think that anyone who is, either on the fence, open-minded,
Mm.
certain of how they view it, pro choice, um, you know, all of those people, I would say all of the above, it would be a beneficial in different ways for them to read, I think.
Definitely. I mean, I remember when I first finished reading it the first time, and I remember thinking everyone needs to read this because no matter what
Yeah.
your view is, it just has, it speaks to you so much. And even if you've never gone through an abortion, or you have, or you know someone that has, and you are likely to know someone that has, I remember
Yes.
speaking to a friend, and I had just mentioned something that I had learned from your book. Like, it wasn't specifically about the book, I just sort of relayed a fact from it. And she revealed to me that she had actually had an abortion. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. And then we, had that open conversation.
Yeah.
And I, of course, recommended the book to her because I just thought, she was very sort of secretive about it. And she really
Yeah.
said everything in really hushed tones. And I just thought, this is exactly what your book is saying, is that
Yeah.
people are just, it's such a secretive thing, and the
Hmm.
discourse is just so, I don't know, that it just really shouldn't be spoken about,
Yeah.
and that it isn't normal, and that's just not the case at all.
Mm.
So no, I completely agree, and I agree that everyone, or even if you don't want to, I think you should read the book, but
Yeah.
so was there anything in the book, or anything that didn't make it into the book, and why?
I mean, I guess, uh, you know, I ended up, after my initial sort of fear of, I don't have enough stories, and now I don't, what do people want to hear? I definitely ended up with too many stories, and I kind
Mm.
of had to streamline, I guess, to stop it being this kind of rambling.
Mm.
Obviously I've dealt with, God, I probably in the thousands of patients by now, over the last almost decade. And everyone's story has something that is, I guess, of interest, and it's going to apply to somebody.
Mm.
So there were just so many stories that I found fascinating and really important, and had something to say that I just couldn't put in,
Yeah.
because I had to keep it readable and interesting, and I wanted, um, I needed to kind of keep it structured in a way that I could give 20 examples of someone from
Mm.
this, for this chapter, but we kind of had to, keep it brief enough that I'm not kind of just going off topic and just telling people stories for the sake of it. And
Yeah.
I also didn't want it to be that I'm just telling stories for the sake of it.
Mhm.
I wanted each story to have a purpose, and to bring something new, a different perspective to the book. And I think, as time went on, obviously the process between kind of, as short as we tried to make it, there is a time between when you finish the draft of the book and it gets made, and now obviously so much happens in terms of the politics around it, and the statistics change, year on year. So I
Mm.
guess there will be changes for the paperback, just some sort of updates, because obviously we talk about the government at the time, and quotes and stats. So there will be some updates, but I guess it's a kind of constantly evolving discussion.
Yeah.
And at some point, I'd sent the final draft, and then I was thinking, oh, I want to make that point, or someone's just quoted that. And at some point, um my editor had to say, we need to stop adding things. So
Yeah.
I could keep updating it, but eventually you have to just sort of call it and say, right, this is the as up-to-date version as we can get. People
Mm.
understand that things change. So yeah, it was difficult to kind of know when to stop. But
Yeah.
hopefully we kind of got I got the balance right between not kind of going into too much detail about every single point,
Yeah.
and you know keeping it relevant.
Yeah, which I can imagine having a co-writer definitely helped with, to sort of maybe
Yes,
condense it down and choose which
exactly.
stories were going to be the most relevant to the chapter and stuff. So just in relation to chapters, do you have a favorite chapter that you wrote?
I think, what would be my favorite chapter? I mean, I quite like, just for sort of where I tried to, I guess, bring in a bit of humor and keeping it light-hearted, is the protester chapter.
Hmm.
Because I couldn't write the book without acknowledging that
Yeah.
there is this other side to it. And I think that's kind of how I've even encountered the protesters, how I've kind of tried to keep it. I am quite light-hearted. You have to be when you do such I guess, a hard-hitting job sometimes.
Hmm.
And I think trying to touch on the kind of the rhetoric of the anti-choice, um their movement, I guess,
Mm.
and hopefully dispelling some of that information that is put out there by that movement, and also just adding some humor to what I know a lot of my patients found a traumatic part of their experience was encountering protesters.
Yeah.
So trying to you know bring that lightheartedness to it. And people have different opinions, and this is okay, and this is how we've dealt with
Mm.
it. And it's okay that we disagree, and to try and not let them, or the kind of information from that side, have too much of a negative impact on your experience.
Yeah.
But I guess there were aspects of each of the chapters that I really enjoyed getting into, and each chapter that I was each time we started a new chapter, I thought, oh, this is really interesting, this is my favorite one at the moment. And
Yeah.
it kind of, so I do love aspects that I've really enjoyed writing them all. And there were some that were, I guess, more light-hearted, and some that were really much emotionally much more challenging.
Mm.
But I do, when I kind of read it back over and over, and I do think each time I read it, I thought, I love that bit of that chapter, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
But I guess the one where I tried to put a bit more humor in, and is probably that protester chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a hard question to ask. That's why I thought I would just see if you did have an
Yeah,
opinion or anything, because as a writer, you would sort of love everything. But that's interesting because, like you said, it is quite a hard hitting job, but it's also a hard hitting book as well. Like there is a lot of hard things to read in there about the women that you've either interviewed or your patients. So yeah, I think it was nice to have that sort of it broken up a little bit as well. No, it's lovely. Right, so we'll just conclude a little bit here. So is there anything else that you're currently working on?
so I mean, I'm very busy. I've got my children,
Yes.
and I do obviously do my work. So I do my work, and I'm with patients most days.
Mhm.
I In terms of the book side of things, there's a few exciting opportunities that are coming about. Obviously, at some point soon, I'll be working on some additions for, updates for the paperback, which will be
Mhm.
out sort of spring next year. But at the moment, we've actually, so I've just signed the rights to potentially a movie to be made,
My
which is
goodness.
crazy how this is sort of, all happening. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was approached by someone who is really keen um, on kind of creating a movie, a sort of dramatization of my story and the stories of the patients.
Wow.
So that's potentially, obviously, that takes a long time, but
Mhm.
that's potentially something that we are, that I'm sort of looking into doing. Um, that was, it's such a bizarre kind of, how these things evolve. And from one discussion, from one radio, I'm now having these sort of Zoom calls with someone from Hollywood, and it's all a bit,
Oh my
it's
goodness.
very exciting, and I really am so hopeful and so grateful for the opportunity to get these stories out there and to have a say
Mhm.
in hopefully changing some of the negative discourse, as you said, about the topic. So that's sort of one thing that is in the pipeline potentially. And also, I've been talking to a podcasting team
Oh my goodness.
about creating potentially a podcast. So it's sort of in the early stages of the briefing, but I guess it would look like a sort of regular podcast discussion. We're potentially looking at a co-host from the US,
Mhm.
where obviously it's very big and very topical, and I talk a bit about the US in the book. And it would be, the format would be sort of, talking similar to the book, talking about different people's experiences, maybe picking on, a person or an experience each episode, giving
Mhm.
some background, guest speakers from, professionally, personal, stories, and going from there. So, again, it's all very early in the kind of processes, but it's just you harnessing the momentum from the book and the interest in
Mhm.
the book, and trying to use this to just in different formats get the discussion out there, have people aware of it, of the realities, get people talking. So yes, those are a few things that I'm sort of busy working on in the background. So,
Oh.
over the next year or two, I guess, watch this space, and hopefully we'll um, I'll be able to keep that discussion going.
Yeah, oh my God, congratulations. That
Thank
that
you.
just sounds incredible. And I mean, I can imagine you wouldn't even think that it would get to this point when you started writing the book, or when you spoke to your publisher friend,
Yeah,
that it would
yeah.
get to a point where you're thinking of creating a movie. I mean, that would be a movie I would watch instantly.
Oh, good. Thank
Um,
you.
that sounds amazing. I'll definitely watch that space. And just finally, what should people do now to sort of continue the discussion that you started with the book, and make abortion sort of part of a normal conversation?
I guess it's people have got to feel comfortable. I'm not trying to get people to put themselves in an uncomfortable position, or worse, an unsafe position where they,
Mm,
where they're not happy to give away. It takes time. Changing discussion, having these discussions, it can be a slow process, and it starts with just, as with the book, and potentially being a podcast and a movie, sometimes these things snowball, and they've got to start slowly.
mm,
But I think, people can just show up as someone who is, open and non-judgmental to their friends, and like you having that discussion about the
mm,
book, and your friend was then able to have, support in you, and
mhm,
you may be the first person she's told, and just being able to, the I think people underestimate the difference that they can make in showing support, because it not only means that that person has someone that they can talk to, but it also means that that person then can look and look differently at their own abortion,
mhm,
their own choices, and not feel a certain way for making that choice. So I think, having open discussions amongst family and friends, and trying to be brave and put
mm,
yourself in a position where, you're saying, this is what I feel, this is what I believe, or this was my experience. And it's, I guess, back to what your partner asked about the gay, question and the gay aspect of life. It's sort
Mm,
of sometimes like a coming out story, I guess, for people. It seems
mm,
when people talk to me about, I told my partner, I told my mom, and this was their reaction. Some are positive and some are negative, and
mhm,
it's just having that strength to say, this is my experience, these are the choices, I'm standing by my choices,
mhm,
and people hopefully, and it's not always the case, but I hope that people are surprised by the support and the reaction, and they will get support from somewhere, from someone.
mm,
um there are enough people that are of like-minded, that are
mhm,
non-judgmental, and it's just putting yourself out there as one of those people, so that what is out there is not just the vocal anti-choice. We have to be loud, we have to be brave, and we have to put
mhm.
ourselves out there as sort of allies and supporters of each other, and of
Okay.
create that space where people don't have to divulge, they don't have to give away all their secrets, but
Mhm,
they are able to if they want, and
mhm,
to feel comfortable. And it's a privilege, if someone comes to you and they disclose something that may be a secret, that's a privilege, and to see that as a privilege, that they have trusted you with that information. So there's hopefully lots we can do, and voting, obviously,
mm.
very topical today,
Yeah.
voting for the things that you believe in, and the kind of voting for the society that you want to create. So we'll maybe going to see massive changes. Let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was brilliant. I think as well, just sort of like making sure you know that individual, you can make a change as an individual. I think some people
Yes.
forget because there's
Yeah.
not massive change, that's how it starts, is you just doing
Yes,
individual small
absolutely.
things. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much. I feel like that conversation just changed me. That was so brilliant. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you, Millie. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity just to ramble, as I like clearly like to do.
Of course. I feel like we could talk for ages. I would be happy to
Yeah.
talk for so long. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed.